I used to know the sound of home. It was a cupboard door clicking shut. It was a kettle breathing into warmth. It was the thin, stubborn laughter that came even when winter tried to starve us. Before the war-ravaged kingdom turned our streets to ash, I could tell where danger lived by how the light shifted on cobblestone. But when the border banners tore, when the sky began to glow with distant fires every night, I learned a different kind of warning, whispers that never reached the ear, stares that held too long. Names spoken like they were already mourning me. I didn't run at first. I told myself I would be useful, that I could trade, heal, carry water, press bandages into the hands of men who would never come back. I thought suffering could be organized if I worked hard enough. Then they brought me out into the square. The old stone there had been cracked for years, but that morning it looked freshly broken, jagged like teeth. Snow had melted into dirty puddles. Smoke clung to every breath. The people I'd watched grow old had gathered in a tight ring around the well. Ola stood nearest the center. Ola was the one who always said she knew things. She knew where roots grew medicinally in ruined fields. She knew which herbs would survive the cold. She knew what to do when a baby wouldn't latch. I trusted her because my hands learned comfort from her hands, but she wore the face of someone who had already made herself a stranger. She held a strip of black cloth torn from a mourning robe, frayed at the edges. The fabric looked almost alive in the way it drank the light. When she lifted it, the crowd leaned forward as if pulled by rope. Vesperlin, someone said, and my name sounded like an order. My throat tightened. I kept my chin level anyway. Agency, I reminded myself. Whatever they tried, I would not beg. I would not be dragged like I was already dead. Ola stepped closer. Her boots left wet prints in the slush. "You've been marked," she told me, voice soft enough that only I could hear it. "The war won't spare us. The border won't either. The kingdom needs a price." Price. My stomach turned. A price for what? She didn't answer directly. Her gaze flicked, not to my face, but to my hands, the ones stained with soot, cracked from work, always reaching out to patch someone else. She stared like she could see the hidden shape beneath my skin. "They say you carry what their hunters fear," she continued. "They say the Alpha King's beast would recognize you. If you go, you bring a bargain. If you go, you save children from the same hunger that takes adults." The crowd murmured in synchronized grief. I tried to breathe. The air smelled like wet wool and old blood. My tongue tasted iron. Every instinct in me screamed that this was not protection. This was a ritual, dressed as mercy. I looked for my neighbor's people I'd boiled broth for, who'd once pressed my palms warm against their fevered foreheads. I tried to catch their eyes. I got only avoidance. Ola lifted the black cloth again. "No," I said. The word was quiet. I didn't shout it into the world like a fight. I didn't throw it like a weapon. I shaped it like a promise. "No." Ola's expression tightened. The slightest tremor ran through her fingers. Then she turned toward the ring of villagers and raised her voice. "She is cursed," she declared, louder than any honest confession. "She is the offering. She is the necessary sacrifice." My knees went weak. Not from fear. There was something worse than fear. It was understanding. It was the sick clarity that betrayal doesn't always arrive with hatred. Sometimes it arrives with careful words. They didn't drag me with ropes at first. They stepped around me, guiding my arms as if they were steering a frightened animal toward a trap. Hands touched my sleeves and tightened with methodical sympathy. I could have fought. I could have bitten and scratched, could have made them pay for every bruise, but that's what they wanted, the spectacle, the excuse, the justification for my unruliness. So I did something else. I let my feet pivot. I used the space they gave me only because they thought I'd stumble toward their certainty. I pulled my wrist free, just enough, and slammed my palm against the ground. The sound shocked even me. A sharp crack echoed across the stone. Cold bit into my hand, pain flared up my arm, but the stone didn't just hurt, it answered under my palm. The ground seemed to shiver, like a living thing reacting to a familiar scent. Heat rippled up through my bones, not as a burning, but as a signal. The crowd fell silent. A few heads turned toward Orla. Her eyes widened just for a breath, like she'd seen a door open where she thought there was only wall. I withdrew my hand, breathing hard. Then I ran. I ran between bodies that were too stunned to move quickly, slipping through the gap that formed when people realized their plan had holes. My boots sank in slush. Someone reached for my cloak, but I jerked away and kept going. Behind me, I heard Orla call my name once, no longer as a verdict, but as a desperate attempt to regain control. The war-ravaged kingdom welcomed my panic with a cruelty that didn't care about innocence. I fled into the edge of the forest where the trees were scarred from battles, where trunks bore claw marks and burn lines. Snow fell in thin, spiteful flakes. Every step sounded too loud. I didn't look back until my legs started to fail. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, I saw what fear never wants you to see. Torches moved in the distance like a slow tide, not soldiers with proper armor, not hunters with wolves at their heels. My own village. They'd brought their judgment with them. They weren't chasing me to punish me. They were chasing me to deliver me. I ran harder. The cold sharpened. My fingers went numb around a small bundle I'd shoved into my pack: dried herbs, a needle case, a folded scrap of black cloth I'd secretly kept from Orla's ritual pile. I didn't know why I held it. I just couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It felt like evidence of a lie. My throat burned with each breath. And then, without warning, the forest opened, not into a clearing meant for travelers, into a ravine that cut like a wound across the land. At the bottom of it, iron smoke curled around stones carved with old warnings. I saw the first of the ruins and felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. My skin prickled along my arms. Then I heard it, a low sound, like wind through ribs. Not a human howl, a pack breathing together. I swallowed. I pressed my back to a boulder, listening. The air smelled of wet earth and old metal. Somewhere nearby, a scent drifted through the cold, sharp and clean, the kind of smell that made my memories flash forward to stories I'd heard as a child. The Alpha King. People said he ruled the borderlands where war-ravaged kingdoms collided. People said his beast was older than their fears. People said his pack didn't just obey, it judged. My escape route had led me straight into his territory. When the first wolf stepped into view, I froze. Anyway, its fur was dark as bruised velvet. Its eyes caught the grey light with a dull, dangerous gleam. It didn't rush me. It approached with a controlled slowness, like a door being opened carefully. Behind it, more shapes moved through the trees, heads low, muscles tense. A sound rose from deep in the pack, not a growl like threat, but a sound like recognition. I should have run. My feet didn't cooperate. My body did something I didn't choose. It steadied. I reached into my pack for the dried herbs. My hand shook. I pulled out a small cloth-wrapped pouch and unrolled it. Inside were crushed leaves, pale and bitter. I wasn't hunting. I wasn't fighting. I was grounding myself in what I knew, healing. When the nearest wolf sniffed toward my hands, I held still. I didn't reach for its fur. I breathed slow and quiet. The wolf's nostrils flared. Then, to my shock, it sat. The others didn't pounce. They formed a loose ring, leaving a narrow corridor between them, like they were giving me a way through. My lungs tightened. "I'm not your enemy," I whispered, even though I didn't know if they understood words. The wolf closest to me tilted its head, then the corridor shifted, the pack moved aside, and I saw him. Calethorn stood at the edge of the ravine like an unfinished omen. His presence didn't crash into me. It settled over me, thick and heavy, like a cloak made of authority. He wore a war cloak, dark enough to drink the light. Wolf fur lined the collar. His eyes held a pale silver that made my instincts recoil, not because of cruelty, because of containment. He was the kind of man whose walls had walls. His beast moved under his skin like something restless. The moment I saw him, every story I'd heard sharpened into fear. But I also saw something else, flickering behind his stillness. His gaze tracked my hands, tracked the pouch, tracked the black cloth in my pack. My pulse hammered. He spoke, voice low, roughened by command and silence. "You ran from your own." It wasn't a question. I steadied my breath again. I forced my voice to stay calm. "I ran from betrayal." One wolf shifted, claws scraping lightly at stone. Calethorn didn't move, but his beast stirred, like it had turned a page. "You were meant to be delivered," he said. I felt my anger flare hot, immediate. Not because he was calling my suffering out as fact, but because he sounded like he knew the machinery behind it. "How?" I demanded. I didn't shout. I couldn't afford to. My throat was dry. My temper tried to climb out of my ribs. He stepped forward one pace. The ravine air tightened, as if the world held its breath. "My pack smelled the lie on you," he said, "and something else." His eyes narrowed. Then the wolves leaned in, not toward him, but toward me. I swallowed hard. "Something else?" I echoed. Calethorn's mouth tightened. The beast under his skin made itself known through the stillness of the air. His silence felt like a warning. "You carry old blood," he said at last. "Not the kind they can name, not the kind that kneels." My stomach dropped. He wasn't making me a suspect. He was making me a mystery. Olaga's black cloth in my pack suddenly felt heavier, as if it had weight enough to drag me under. I tried to back away. My heel caught on uneven stone, and I stumbled. Calethorn lifted his hand, not to strike, not to grab. The wolves went still. They held their position like a promise. Then he pointed, not at me, but past me, toward the shadows behind a stand of broken trees. "Follow," he ordered. I should have refused. But when I looked at the pack, I saw something terrifyingly gentle in the way they allowed movement. The corridor they'd formed hadn't closed when he spoke. It stayed open, so I stepped forward. The ravine walls smelled like wet stone and iron. My boots scuffed against moss. I kept my shoulders squared, even as my fear clawed at my ribs. Calethorn walked ahead, his cloak moving like a dark tide. As we moved, the wolves flanked us, silent sentries, their breathing synchronized with my steps. The woods filled with a constant, low rhythm, a protective pulse that made me feel, for the first time in days, like I wasn't alone. That comfort didn't erase danger. It sharpened it, because as we reached the edge of his territory, the sky cleared enough for the moonlight to spill across a road made of old stone, and on that road I saw the aftermath of violence. Burned wagons, broken shields, charcoal black footprints dragging toward a border gate. War-ravaged kingdoms had swallowed my homeland like a mouth. Calethorn stopped at a stone arch carved with wolves, symbols of allegiance and control. His pack waited behind him. He looked down at me then, the way a judge looks at a witness. "Your village will follow," he said. "They will try to claim what they think belongs to them." I swallowed. "Let them try." The words came out steadier than I expected. Calethorn didn't flinch. Instead, His beast made a subtle sound in his throat, something restrained, like it wanted to answer my defiance by protecting me harder. He turned his head slightly, and the wolves moved with him. I followed along the path toward his keep. The walls rose from the earth like broken teeth, rebuilt into armor. Torchlight flickered across banners. The air inside smelled of smoke, bread, and leather. I expected gates to slam, expected guards to point spears. Instead, the wolves moved first. They carried me forward like I was part of the pack's orbit. Calethorn entered the keep through a corridor lit with iron lanterns. My boots. The stone floor felt cold underfoot. Men and women appeared in doorways, tense and watchful. When they saw Calethorn, they bowed, not fully relaxed, but enough to show him authority. When they saw me, the air shifted. Their gazes were sharp, not kind, not hostile either, more like they were measuring the risk of having me near the king. The beast in Calethorn remained contained, but I felt it, like electricity, behind a closed door. He didn't introduce me with ceremony, he didn't offer me comfort, he simply walked through the keep as if I belonged there. That was more dangerous than any kindness, because it meant he was choosing. And when a powerful man chooses, everyone else has to decide whether they will obey his will or fight it. As we reached a chamber with a stone hearth, Calethorn stopped. His wolves remained at the doorway, heads low. He motioned toward the hearth with 2 fingers. Sit. I didn't sit immediately. I looked at the room, clean straw at the side, a blanket folded with care, a bowl of water placed where it could be reached without crossing the room. Ordinary preparations. Not interrogation, not ritual, just readiness. I sat carefully on the edge of the straw, keeping my spine straight. Calethorn watched me, as if waiting to see whether I would flinch at his authority. I pulled my pack closer. I took out the herbs and laid them on a cloth. My fingers worked through the motions unbinding knots, checking the leaves for freshness. My hands needed tasks. Tasks kept me from thinking too hard about why the village had decided my life was an acceptable price. My ears caught every sound, the creak of leather straps, the hiss of torch flames, the soft shifting of wolves outside. Calethorn's presence sat in the room without touching me. Then he spoke, quiet. They planned to deliver you to me. I looked up sharply. To sacrifice me to your beast? A flicker crossed his face. Barely there, not anger. Something colder. They planned to use my refusal against me, he said. I blinked. What does that mean? Calethorn stepped closer, stopping far enough away that I could still breathe. They wanted me to accept what they offered, he said. If I refused, they'd call me weak. If I accepted, they'd call it proof your blood belongs to their hands. I stared at him. He wasn't just refusing to sacrifice me, he was refusing to let my suffering become a weapon. That made my chest ache. I didn't let the ache turn into surrender. I lifted my chin, then refused them again. Calethorn's gaze held mine. The beast under his skin stirred alive. It felt like it could leap through the air if given permission. Your village will arrive before dawn, he said. I'm not giving them my body, I replied. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, and one of his wolves nudged the stone door from outside with its nose. A faint scent drifted in, wet, iron, burnt hair. I tensed. The wolf returned to stillness. Then Calethorn stepped back, as if granting me the space to decide my next breath. I didn't bring you here to end you, he said. I brought you here because my pack refused to let your chain touch their king. My hands went cold. You didn't tell your pack to protect me, I said. He paused. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, but the wall between him and honesty cracked enough for something raw to show. They chose, he admitted. I didn't know whether to be relieved or more afraid. Because if wolves decided something, it wasn't just emotion, it was instinct. And instinct was never wrong. When the first knock came at the iron gate, it wasn't human. It was a pounding from the outside boots, dragging, voices raised in prayer and command. The keep trembled slightly under it. Calethorn moved first. He didn't storm into the hall. He didn't shout for guards. He simply stepped into position beside the throne room's archway, where the hallway opened into the center of his domain. His pack gathered behind him. All the wolves I'd seen at the ravine were here now, lined like living armor. I stood in the chamber doorway, still clutching my herb pouch, as if it were proof I could still be myself. Down the hallway, torches flared, shadows stretched like claws. The villagers poured into the outer hall, faces drawn, hands gripping black cloth chains and tools that had once been used for farming. Orla led them. Her eyes found me immediately. Relief crossed her face, and then, when she saw the wolves around Calethorn, relief curdled into fury. She lifted the black cloth as if it were a banner of authority. "Vespelin," she called. I heard the crowd behind her murmur my name as a claim. I didn't respond. Orla turned toward Calethorn. "Alpha King, this one is ours." Calethorn didn't move. His beast stayed quiet, but the air around him thrummed. The wolf's posture shifted, subtle but undeniable, not a rush, a refusal. Orla stepped forward again, boots scraping stone. "We offered you a bargain with your fate. We bring the offering you were promised." My stomach tightened. "Promised by who?" I asked. The words surprised me when they left my mouth. They weren't timid. They weren't pleading. They were demand. Orla's gaze snapped to me, sharp. "By necessity, by the old ways." "The old ways sold me," I said. My voice shook once, then steadied. "You didn't save anyone. You used fear to hide your choices." The crowd hissed. Someone tried to step toward me. Calethorn lifted his hand, not high enough to threaten, but enough to command. The wolves tensed. One of them took a single step forward, and the hall seemed to narrow. No one wanted to be the first to test the beast's boundary. Orla's jaw tightened. "We will take her," she said. Calethorn's voice cut through the air. "No." It was one word. It didn't contain emotion, but it contained power. Orla stared at him as if she couldn't understand how a man could refuse a ritual that everyone else believed was necessary. "This is a war kingdom," she insisted. "If your beast wants what's owed, you can't refuse." I felt the truth of her. She wasn't just trying to retrieve me. She was trying to force Calethorn into a role. If he rejected the offering, she needed to prove he would reject order too. If he accepted, she needed to prove I was theirs to sacrifice again. I understood, suddenly, why my village had pushed me into exile. They weren't hiding me from danger. They were hiding me from accountability. Calethorn's gaze dropped to my herb pouch. Then it lifted again. "My pack smelled you before your village even reached the border," he said. "They refused you. That decision is stronger than any ritual you carry." Orla's mouth opened. Then she smiled. Like someone pulling a trick, she turned to me and spoke as if she was giving me permission to be afraid. "Your hands are useful. The Alpha King will realize what you are. He won't let you keep your power. He'll take it. Power." The word struck a chord I hadn't known existed. In my childhood, I'd been warned not to touch certain roots. I'd been told to keep my palms clean. I'd been told the ground could remember. I'd believed those warnings were superstition. Now I felt it differently. A hidden current moved under my ribs. It wasn't rage. It was recognition. The black cloth in my pack seemed to pulsatile, like a heartbeat I'd been ignoring. Calethorn watched my face. His wolves watched too. Orla leaned closer, voice low. "When the right blood stands near the right beast, the curse wakes, And then, you'll belong to the only hands strong enough to hold it. My breathing turned shallow. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to say she was lying, but the truth moved inside me, pressing against my skin, like a bird testing an egg's shell. The air in the hall shifted. Torch smoke curled upward in a sudden spiral. The stone beneath my boots vibrated faintly. I didn't plan what I did next. My hands moved on their own, unwrapping the herb pouch. While I stared at Orla, I crushed a leaf between my fingers. The smell, bitter and sharp, filled the air. The wolves around Calethorn inhaled at the same time. Orla flinched. Calethorn's eyes narrowed, my palms warmed. Heat spread down my arms, into the herbs, into the air itself. I felt the room's stones like a map. Under my feet, every crack and seam, every hidden vein where magic had been trapped. I wasn't fighting, I was waking something. Orla backed up a step, then another. "No!" she whispered, as if the ritual had betrayed her. Calethorn stepped forward slowly. His cloak brushed the floor with a quiet sound. "Thespelin," he said, using my name like it was a key. I looked at him. My voice came out rough. "What is happening?" He didn't answer with certainty. He answered with focus. "Your village tried to sell your gift, but you don't belong to them." My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous. I'd been betrayed by people who used my name in sweet tones. Orla tried to recover control. She lifted her black cloth toward me again, as if she could stitch fate closed. "Stop," Calethorn ordered. Orla froze mid-motion. Her eyes widened. Because the wolves didn't just stand between us. They formed a living barrier, their bodies angled like shields. Their growls weren't rage. Calethorn's beast shifted under his skin, and the air around Orla tightened like the world had decided. Her hands belonged elsewhere. Orla coughed once, twice, and looked at me with something like terror. "What are you?" she asked. I stared down at my hands, at the crushed herb staining my fingers green-black. I didn't know the full answer, but I felt the truth. The ground remembered me. The pack recognized me. Calethorn refused to sacrifice me because his instinct already knew I was not a price. I was a choice. Calethorn's gaze softened by degrees, like an iron gate opening in slow motion. "Come," he said. He didn't say it like an order to submit. He said it like an invitation with teeth. His wolves shifted again, opening a corridor toward the keep's inner hall. Orla's face crumpled in anger. She threw her black cloth onto the floor. The villagers surged forward, but Calethorn turned his head slightly. Every wolf moved at once. No frantic violence, just coordinated refusal. The villagers slammed to a stop, as if the air had turned to water. I watched, breath caught, as the barrier held. Then the crowd began to scatter, some trapped by shock, some dragged back by their own fear. Orla remained for a moment longer. Her eyes met mine. In them I saw the final truth I hadn't wanted. Orla hadn't only sold me out of necessity, she'd sold me out of belief that I could carry everyone's survival but mine. She'd used my hidden powers like a weapon, without asking what I wanted to become. Then she turned and left, black cloth trailing like a shadow. The hall emptied, silence returned, only torches crackled. I stood shaking, herbs still on my fingertips. My skin felt too hot, like the world had pressed a brand into my bones. Calethorn approached carefully, one pace at a time, as if he was learning the distance that kept me safe. His wolves stayed behind him. His hands remained at his sides. He didn't touch me. That restraint hit harder than any display of dominance. "Your gift didn't ask permission," he said. My voice was barely a whisper. "Neither did my village." Calethorn's beast shifted again, and I saw the slightest tremor in his jaw. Not emotion spoken aloud, anger held in containment. He nodded toward my hands. You healed the ground. I stared at him. I didn't mean to. Meaning is a luxury, he replied. Then he added, quieter, as if that was the truth he'd never wanted to admit. But it doesn't control what you are, I swallowed. He gestured toward the hearth chamber again. You need warmth. And you need to learn what you can do without burning yourself. I wanted to say no. I wanted to insist. I could figure this out alone. But my body felt wrong, in a new way, not wounded charged. Like my powers were a storm, I'd only just realized lived inside my ribs, so I stepped back into the chamber. Calethorn followed at a distance, his silhouette steady in torchlight. He ordered one of his attendants to bring clean water, but his pack remained close, not crowding, guarding. I washed my hands slowly, watching green-black residue vanish into clear water. The heat in my palms lingered anyway. It didn't fade when I rinsed. It sank instead, into my skin, into something deeper. Calethorn watched until I looked up. What now? I asked. His gaze held mine. Then his voice dropped. Now you tell me what they promised you. I inhaled, preparing myself to be careful. I had no reason to trust him yet. He was powerful. Powerful men could become dangerous without meaning to. But Calethorn's beast had refused the offering. That mattered. That was a decision in my favor. So I told him. I told him about Orlag's black cloth, about the way the crowd's grief had felt rehearsed, about the moment my palm touched stone and the earth shivered. I told him about the warnings in my childhood. Keep your hands clean. Don't speak to roots. Don't walk on certain graves. When I finished, the room felt heavier. Calethorn didn't interrupt. He didn't speak with comfort. Instead, he listened with the kind of focus that made me realize his walls weren't just made of strength. They were made of control. Control against breaking. Control against failing again. He stepped closer, still careful not to crowd me. Your village used a curse story to hide their fear, he said. But curses don't choose who survives. Gifts do. I stared at him. Then why did they call me cursed? His eyes narrowed, as if he was searching for a truth he hated. Because the only way to control a woman with a gift, he said, is to convince her that her power is a threat to others. My chest tightened. Because he sounded like he'd lived through that logic too. Calethorn's beast stirred. A faint, low sound escaped him, restrained. He turned his head toward the doorway. His pack shifted. I sensed the next danger before it arrived. He returned his gaze to me. They'll try again, he warned. I looked down at my herbs. Then I'll be ready. Calethorn studied me, like he was deciding whether I would break or bloom. Then he nodded once. Good, he said. And in that one word, the wall between us shifted. It didn't disappear. It cracked. The next days became training without chains. He didn't teach me by forcing me to kneel. He taught me by giving me space to try. When my power surged, he didn't call me a curse. When my hands warmed, he didn't demand proof through fear. Instead, he had me practice healing on the smallest things first. Splintered wood, bruised fabric, injured wolves. The wolves didn't flinch when I approached. Now they watched me with a patience that made my throat ache. Their eyes held questions, and my answers became actions. I learned to read the subtle currents under my skin. It responded to intention. I hummed when I worked, soft tones to steady the rhythm of my breathing. At first it was nervous. Then it became instinct. When I hummed, the room's air relaxed. The stone stopped shivering. The pack's tension eased like a knot. Loosening, Calethorn noticed. His beast noticed. Even when he stood stiff and distant, his wolves adjusted around him, giving me more room, more time. It frightened me how much their behavior betrayed him, because a king could pretend he didn't want something, but a pack couldn't. One evening, when winter light drained into grey. I found a wounded wolf near the outer yard. A hunter had hit it, an arrow wound deep enough to threaten infection. The animal's breathing was shallow. Its eyes tracked me with bright pain. I should have waited for Caelthorn's command, but my hands moved faster than my fear. I crouched and cleaned the wound with warm water, using herbs to draw out poison. I hummed the way Caelthorn had taught me, low, steady, a bridge between my power and the wolf's survival. The wolf trembled, then steadied. Not because it trusted me blindly, because the heat in my palms answered it. When the wolf's breathing deepened, I exhaled shakily, and then I felt presence behind me. Caelthorn had not approached loudly. He stood at the edge of the yard, cloak half open, torchlight catching the silver of his eyes. His pack circled behind him, but their bodies were less like guards now and more like witnesses. I looked back over my shoulder. He didn't say anything about my disobedience. He didn't scold. He simply watched, jaw clenched, like he was trying to keep his beast from stepping closer. When I met his gaze, he nodded once, approval without ceremony. It made my throat burn, not with romance, with vindication. Someone finally saw me as more than an offering. Then came the shocking twist I never anticipated. It arrived in the form of a message delivered to the keep's gate at dawn, scratched into wax-sealed parchment with a hurried hand. Orla had returned. She wasn't alone. She'd brought a man from the old court's records. A scribe with trembling fingers and eyes too wide. They demanded an audience. Caelthorn refused publicly at first. His wolves blocked the outer hall. But the scribe slid the paper through the cracks like he was feeding a blade into the dark. Caelthorn finally read it. I watched from a distance as his expression tightened. The beast under his skin shifted. A quiet, dangerous sound rose from him, not a growl, but the beginning of one. He turned his head toward me. "You knew them," he said. I frowned. I knew Orla. Everyone in my village did. No. He stepped closer, the air tightening. "You knew my predecessor's promise." My stomach sank. I didn't understand, but I did recognize something in his tone. Grief held so tightly, it looked like anger. He gestured me forward. When I reached him, he pressed the parchment into my hands. The ink on it was faded, as if it had been hidden for years. I read the lines slowly. A pact, a binding, a promise made between an old council and a line of women who carried the earth's memory. The pact stated that one woman from the line would be offered at the border during each cycle of war, so the kingdom would survive. It named my bloodline, and it named my mother, though I'd never been told her name. Orlag's role in it was worse than I'd imagined. Orlag wasn't just a betrayer, she was the keeper of a contract. She'd been instructed to deliver the woman at the right time, and when the time came, she used the village's fear to make the sacrifice feel deserved. My hands started to shake. "What does it say about me?" I whispered. Caelthorn's eyes held mine. "It says you aren't cursed," he replied. "It says you were stolen from yourself. It says your power was meant to grow under protection, not under fear." Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I didn't want softness to become weakness. I looked up at him. "So the kingdom used me as a tool." Caelthorn's beast shifted harder, claws scraping stone somewhere in his line. His pack drew closer. The wolves didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me like a vow. When Caelthorn spoke, his voice was low enough to feel like a secret carved into bone. My predecessor accepted the old bargain. I refused to keep it. I stared at him. "You refused?" He nodded once. "Then why did I see people try to deliver me like a sack?" I asked. His eyes darkened. "Because the bargain isn't only in ink," he said. "It's in tradition, in fear, in people who need a scapegoat to believe their cruelty is destiny." I swallowed. Orla's face returned to me. Her soft voice, her practiced grief. her black cloth like a signature. I didn't want revenge, not like violence. I wanted truth to be more powerful than the lie. So I asked Calethorn the only question that mattered now. What are you going to do with me? The words came out firmer than my heart felt. Calethorn's gaze held mine. Then his beast exhaled, a quiet puff of breath that warmed the air around us. He stepped closer, and for the first time he lifted his hand, not to grab my wrist, not to claim me, but to hover near my cheek, as if asking permission without words. I held still. My agency didn't vanish. I didn't become passive. I chose to allow the space. Calethorn's fingers brushed my hair lightly, moving a strand away from my face. He didn't press harder. He didn't take more than he was allowed. His pack went absolutely still, like even the wolves were stunned by restraint. "You will not be sacrificed," he said. "You will be trained. You will be heard. And you will decide how your power is used." My throat tightened. I didn't nod automatically. I didn't surrender. I looked at his eyes and searched for the lie. Found none, because his beast kept its distance too contained, careful, like it was learning to trust me with its hunger. Orlag and the scribe were brought into the hall. The courtyard torches burned. The sky darkened into thick storm-heavy clouds. Calethorn stood at the throne's edge, wolves circling like living walls. Orlag tried to speak, tried to justify the contract. She said she'd acted out of loyalty. She said she'd kept her people safe. She said she believed the bargain was the only way. Her words tasted like rot. I listened. Then I did something that shocked even Calethorn. I didn't condemn her loudly. I didn't accuse her like a weapon. Instead, I stepped forward and offered my hands. The courtyard air went quiet. Orlaga's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she whispered. I crouched beside a guard who'd been injured during the commotion. Ordinary man with a broken rib and fever in his skin. His breathing was shallow. His lips cracked. I cleaned the wound with water, pressed herbs into the skin, and hummed. As I worked, the stones in the courtyard felt like they settled, as if the earth itself recognized my choice. Orla watched, terror and anger battling in her gaze. Because healing wasn't punishment. Healing was proof that I could use my power without chains. When the guard's breathing deepened, the fever receded slightly. Orlag's jaw trembled. I looked up at Calethorn. "My village used me to justify their fear," I said. "I will not become a tool for anyone else." Calethorn's beast stirred, but it didn't dominate the moment. It listened. When I stood, the courtyard wind whipped my cloak and scattered ash. I faced Orla. "I won't kill you," I said, "but you will tell the truth. You will end the lie you've carried." Orlag's eyes burned. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Calethorn gestured once. The wolves stepped back, just enough to let the truth move through the space. Orla finally admitted what she'd done. Not because she was forced into confession like a prisoner, because the earth under the courtyard had started to hum back, because my gift had awakened enough of the old contract's magic to reveal it. The scribe shook, scribbling frantic notes. The kingdom learned that my curse had always been a promise twisted by fear. When it was over, the storm broke. Rain fell in cold sheets, drumming on stone and banners. Calethorn escorted me into the inner hall where the hearth warmed the air. I sat near the fire, exhausted in a way that felt clean rather than humiliating. Calethorn remained a step away. He looked at me like he couldn't decide whether to protect me from the world or let me stand in it. His beast pressed forward through his calm. Then he lowered himself to sit beside me, not in front, not above, but near. His shoulder brushed mine by a fraction. Not a claim, a shared warmth. I didn't speak at first. I listened to rain, to crackling fire, to distant wolves. Then I said quietly, You refused the sacrifice. Calethorn's jaw tightened. I refused, he confirmed. And your beast? I asked. Why didn't it tear everything apart? He exhaled, slow. Because it recognized something it couldn't name yet, he said. It recognized you. Not your bloodline, not your gift. You. I stared at the fire. It was easy to call someone chosen when it was convenient. It was harder to choose when it carried consequences. Calethorn had chosen me when I was an offering. That meant my life wasn't a bargain. It was a beginning. I turned my head slightly. What happens now? He looked at me, silver eyes catching firelight. His beast shifted under his skin, restless with wanting. But he kept his voice steady. Now I bring you into my pack properly. I blinked. Properly? His mouth tightened like he hated the ritual language. Then he nodded toward the door. My pack will accept you as my mate, he said. The air thickened, not with coercion, with ceremony built from consent. I didn't answer immediately. I thought of Orla, of betrayal, of how easy it had been for people to decide my fate without asking. So I asked for the only thing that mattered. Will you give me a choice? I said. Calethorn's beast went still. He held my gaze. Yes, he promised. Then he waited. He didn't trap me with pressure. He didn't use power as a leash. He let me decide. My hands warmed again at the thought of refusing everything that tried to turn me into a tool. I leaned forward until I could rest my forehead against his shoulder. Not surrendering. Choosing. Yes, I whispered. The moment the word left my mouth, the pack outside howled. Not violent, not cruel. It sounded like relief, like a door finally opening. Calethorn's beast calmed, and I felt it in his breath, steady anchored. He placed his hand over mine gently, palm covering my knuckles like a vow. Slowly, carefully, he turned my hand so my fingers curled around his. The bond wasn't just in magic, it was in the way he respected my agency. It was in the way his walls came down, one choice at a time. That night, I fed the pups without being asked. I hummed while I worked. I cleaned and mended small things until the keep felt like mine too. And when the moon rose, Calethorn walked with me out into the courtyard. The rain had washed the air clean. The stones smelled fresh, almost new. Wolves prowled at the edges, calm now, recognizing the peace between us. Calethorn stood beside me and looked at the sky like he was learning how to hope. I didn't wait for him to speak the future. I reached for his hand, fingers interlacing with mine. My power warmed beneath my skin. His beast breathed steady beside me. I wasn't an offering anymore. I wasn't cursed. I was chosen, not because I was broken, because I refused to stay broken. And when destiny finally stopped trying to use me, I let myself step into it, stronger than the lie that tried to exile me, braver than the fear that tried to starve me, and finally safe in the arms of the Alpha King.